So we're really happy to have you all join us here today. My name's Michael Brigham, and I'm a digital engagement lead here at HELP on the knowledge translation team. And in addition to Anne-Marie, we are also joined by Dr. Kim Schonert-Reichl, the director of HELP, who's going to be sharing a bunch of new research on sleep in the middle years, as well as findings from our own collected sample of MDI data over the years, showing how sleep affects well-being. For the benefit of those who cannot join us today, I know there are a couple people who signed up from different time zones. We will be recording this, and we will be placing this on the Discover MDI field guide for people to watch at their later convenience. So let's begin.
Great, thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for all of your help with putting this together. And Anne-Marie, thank you so much for helping run this webinar, and welcome to everyone. I hope you're having a nice day, and hopefully this this presentation won't make you too sleepy. It'll make you more awake, perhaps, about and aware of sleep. So I am Kim Schonert-Reichl, and I'm the professor and director of Human Early Learning Partnership, also in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology and Special Education. There's my contact information, along with my email, Twitter, and the Twitter for HELP as well. So just to give you a bit of a roadmap of what we're going to do in our look at the sleep, we're going to first, I'm going to first do just a brief intro to the Middle Years Development Instrument. Not quite sure who on this webinar is going to watch it later is aware of the MDI, so I'm going to just do a short introduction to that. Then we're going to delve into the sleep landscape and answer the question, how are our children sleeping? Then move to part 3, which is looking at the connection between sleep and well-being, and for basically trying to figure out what we can do to help children get the rest they need. And one thing I do want to say is that I do want to say that there's going to be an opportunity for questions, and there's a way that people can alert Anne-Marie if there's a question, if you type one in along the way, or we'll wait till the end as well. But if there's something for clarification that you need, I certainly can stop and provide that clarification as well. So here we go. So this is just a brief introduction of the Middle Years Development Instrument, or what we commonly refer to as the MDI.
And Kim, we just wanted to start off by doing a really quick poll of the audience, because it's a somewhat broader group of people who are joining us, and so we're curious to know about your knowledge of the Middle Years Development Instrument. So Anne-Marie is going to put a poll up through the webinar, and if you just want to take a second and let us know, that'd be really helpful, both for right now and for our future webinar planning purposes.
Fantastic, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
All right, so we have 61% of the participants voting. It looks like a lot of you have some familiarity with the MDI, which is fantastic. It looks like basically 50% of those who have voted have used the MDI in their planning.
Oh, perfect. Oh,
that's
good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we'll be looking forward to hearing any kind of feedback you have, and how much maybe you've even used these data about sleep from the MDI in your schools and your communities. So for those, I'm just going to give this brief overview about the MDI. It is a measure of, I think I went by, okay, it's a strengths-based measure linked to health, well-being, success, and social and emotional development, both inside and outside of school, for children in grades 4 and 7. And it's a self-report survey, which means that children complete the measure themselves. It's based on recent scientific research on children's social emotional learning, development, positive psychology, and resiliency. So it really takes a strengths-based approach and draws in from some of the most recent science in terms of things like optimism, as well as empathy and other factors related to resiliency, such as connectedness. It was developed, it's sort of different than other surveys that might be developed at a university. The MDI was actually developed through a collaborative process of scientific experts, teachers, children, and community members, in which we really were able to obtain what people were interested in learning about from children, and as well as children's own input about what they thought we need to learn from them. It is used at a population level. It's not an individual diagnostic tool to give you individual answers. It's presented at the school level. The data are culminated and put at the school level and at the district and community level. It focuses on the time period of middle childhood, which is typically the ages of 6 to 12, and we focus on 4th and 7th grade, so it was something like 9 and 10 to about 13, which also we commonly refer to as pre and early adolescence. I know, we have middle childhood, but we also, 4th graders, we typically refer to as pre-adolescence, or on the sort of cusp of our precipice of adolescence, and then early adolescence, which is typically the ages 10 to 14. So you'll hear when I'm talking refer to research on adolescence and sleep, and that's why I'm drawing it, because this is also adolescence. We know that this developmental time period is a particularly important one, in which there's so many changes occurring in such a short time period, both cognitively, being able to think about the future, be able to perspective take, being able to be more socially aware, as well as to have a increased focus on peers versus parents. Academically, there's more self-doubt that emerges, and this idea of mindsets, or thinking about fixed mindsets, and that they start comparing themselves to others academically. And then physically, there's lots of growth, both in their stature, but also in their brain. And I'll be talking a little bit about that brain development. And just another sort of view on this developmental period, it is a time that is a time of a stress pile-up, where so many changes occur in such a short time span, and often is a time of increased risk, but also an increased window of opportunity where you could really have a large impact through relatively small interventions. The MDI focuses on development of the whole child, so that hence the focus today on sleep, because we focus on just the social and emotional well-being, the connectedness, but also nutrition and sleep and after-school time use. We also look at children's lives in multiple contexts, at home, at school, and in the community, and in their peer context, as well as the adult context. We see relationships are central. This is really an important frame in looking at resiliency. The research on resiliency across 5 decades has really said the one single most important aspect of resiliency are close relationships, being able to have those, both in childhood and adulthood. And the MDI really is about children's voices, listening to them, hearing from them about their lives, what they can teach us. And this aligns very nicely with the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 12, that children have a right to give their opinion and be listened to by the adults around them. I always say this, some people feel like, how could 4th graders really complete a survey? Do they do it reliably and validly? And we found over and over again the really strong psychometric properties of the MDI, very supported by the science, and many of our rigorous evaluations of the MDI and how it's able to predict change. And so I just want to assure you that this has been found to be a very reliable and valid instrument. And also, I have to say, when we go and ask children their perspectives, they often very much appreciate that it's not just another test, that we're really asking them for their opinions, and that we tell them that we need to learn from them so we could help build a better world. So it has 5 dimensions of the MDI: physical health and well-being, as I mentioned, nutrition and sleep, connectedness to friends, to family, to adults in school and to the neighborhood, school experiences, including school climate and victimization experiences, use of after-school time, what they do during the after-school hours, both including structured activities, being in sports or dance lessons, and even unstructured time, including screen time and other types of social media use. And then finally, social and emotional development, which includes measuring things like their well-being through looking at their optimism, their happiness, empathy, pro-social behavior, absence of sadness and worries. And I'll be going into that a bit more when we talk about the well-being index, which will be linking to sleep, as you'll see. I'm trying to whet your appetite for the data you will soon share. We will soon share that has not yet been seen. So this is just a quick overview. As I mentioned, the 5 dimensions of the MDI are up there: social emotional development, physical health and well-being, connectedness, use of after-school time and school experiences. And this just gives you, I'm not going to read all of these, just so you know, but just gives you an idea of the breadth of questions that we get answered by the children who participate in the MDI survey. You see, we learn so much about their lives inside and outside of school as well. And we take some of these measures and have created a well-being index that looks at 3 dimensions, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as asset indexes that look at indices that look at things like connectedness, nutrition and sleep, after school time, and social emotional development as well. So how do we measure sleep on the MDI, just so you know, because we're going to be talking about this. We ask children first, how often do you get a good night's sleep? How many days a week? From never all the way to every day. And then for the, we also ask them what time they typically go to bed during the weekdays, just to get an idea, not weekends, but these days during the week of school nights. As I mentioned, there's a well-being index that is a composite of the measures of happiness, health, optimism, self-esteem, and low sadness. And we look at, we categorized the percentage of children who are high, are thriving on these, who are medium to well-being, medium to high well-being, and then to low well-being on the terms of these measures. And to date, some of you who participated, thank you for your participation. To date, we have collected MDIs from 85,289 4th and 7th grade students in the province of British Columbia. Today was the big, this year, the 2017-2018 is the biggest year yet, with 28,492 students across British Columbia completing the MDI. Thank you to all those students and to all those teachers, administrators who helped this be the biggest year yet, which is very exciting because these data we're presenting are really representative of a huge population of children. Just to give you a, for those who are not so aware, or maybe some of you are, that we also have aligned the MDI to BC's new curriculum in relation to the personal and social competencies of positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social responsibility. And I didn't want to miss out. We have this wonderful, wonderful field guide that Michael actually has been the architect behind of so I mean, one of the things about the MDI is that it isn't that we just provide the data, we provide the scaffolding of how to use the data. So if you see this website, I urge many of you to go to this and see the resources, not only on understanding the MDI with wonderful brief, but ways to make change and connect. We have a number of different ways. I'm not going to, certainly if we have some questions about this later on, we can explore more, but I just urge you to go and see, sort of explore what's on the Discover MDI. And just to know, to get there, you just www.discovermdi.ca. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so the sleep landscape. I thought this said the sheep landscape, so thank you. So the sleep landscape, what do we know about sleep these days? I don't know if any of you have ever been sleep deprived. Perhaps some of you are sleep deprived right now and having a big cup of coffee in the afternoon. Well, let's see what's happening with children. So how much sleep do kids need? Well, we know from the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines for children and youth that, and the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology, that in terms of sleep, uninterrupted sleep for 9 to 11 hours of sleep per night for those children ages 5 to 13, and 8 to 10 hours per night for those aged 14 to 17 years, with consistent bed and wake-up times. That is a really key point here, is consistent bedtime and a consistent wake-up time is really critical. We also know in terms of sleep across Canada, from the 2014 Canadian Health Behavior in School-Aged Children, or HBSC, with 29,000 students in grades 6 to 10. We know that the average, from that survey, we know that the average weeknight bedtime is about 10:20. p.m. The average weekday wake-up time is 6:56 a.m. I love the precision here. And sleep duration is 8 hours and 36 minutes, so within the guidelines. And 69% of the students are close to, 2/3 are meeting the minimum sleep recommendation. But still, a sizable amount of children are not. But 60% are reporting feeling tired when going to school. Now, that's an interesting question we have, and I think we're going to try and answer that. Why do they still feel tired when they're going to school? There is some new, I just want to recommend, if anyone's really interested in this whole idea of the teenage brain, there's a great book by Dan Siegel a couple of years ago on the power and purpose of the teenage brain, where he really makes the case of showing what's happening to the teenage brain in the term of that change in the brain and myelinization and the pruning. Also relates to the idea of adolescents, or those emerging adolescents, needing to stay up later. If you've seen that, that's, I think for my own kids, thinking about when did adolescence truly kick in, when they didn't want to go to bed too early and when they were super sleepy waking up in the morning, because that's an important time for brain development. We know that it is also a time of the development of the prefrontal cortex, which is that part of the brain responsible for reasoning, decision-making, and the sort. So I think that, anyways, I recommend this. It really gives you, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the brain and the reason, what are the changes occurring that sort of render it more, need to actually stay up later and wake up in the morning, but again, a really important part of adolescent development. Some other research findings is the brain continues to development during adolescence. And as I mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is developing. And by the way, it isn't supposedly fully developed until age 25 for males. I think maybe a little bit earlier for females, but that we know that that's so important, that executive control or executive functions. We know that brain functions help them plan and adapt to the social environment, and that it helps put situations into context to retrieve memories. So what do we have going on now in our world? And some of you will think about this and think about how you've witnessed it. I'd love to know about that. We have come upon something called the Great Sleep Recession, and that there's declines in self-reported adolescent sleep across the last 20 years. And this is from a great study actually by Keyes et al. That is called the Great Sleep Recession. Used data from a large study of youth adolescents in the United States, and they found that, what are the reasons for this great sleep recession? Of course, many of you probably put to the top of your list the increased internet and social media use, and we'll be getting to that a little bit later and looking at that in our data. Pressure from more competition to get in post-secondary education is also listed, which is actually the anxiety. And I really want to emphasize that sleep duration is not the only factor. Sleep quality plays a big role in well-being. So you could be asleep for the 8 hours of the recommended allowance, but the sleep could be of very poor quality, which you still have the detrimental effects. And then there's also rising rates of obesity, which has been linked with sleep deprivation as well. Okay, so what are some of our findings about from the MDI? What's so interesting is so much of the surveys that have been done, many in the U.S., much of the research is done in the U.S., some in Canada, and the largest study, that certainly the HSBC, which is that health survey behavior of children, but often don't go down to grade 4. So that is it is on the thing. So we don't know a lot about these, maybe aside from parent reports. So what's our key finding? One would be, actually we find that less than 50% of boys and girls report getting a good night's sleep every night. So in the MDI, as you'll see here, excuse me, where you'll see that girls are in the green, boys are in the royal blue, I'll call it. When you look across, you see pretty much the equal amounts of girls and boys getting a good sleep every day. So again, that's across the week. It's about the 40% for each of them, with a 15%. But there's still, until you think of the weekend, so maybe it's 6 times a week, and the kids stay up later on the weekend. But then you still look at, there's a sizable proportion of children children who are not getting a good night's sleep every single weeknight, 5 times a week or 4 times a week. There's still a number of children. But look in grade 7, what you see again across the week, and you see it's gone down quite substantially, where they say every day, from about 40% to something closer to 23% for girls, and maybe 30% for boys, in terms of getting a good sleep every night. And I think what's interesting here is, you know, in the MDI, some of you are familiar, we usually don't break things down by gender. I thought this was a really interesting one that we can evaluate. And why would grade 7 girls be less likely to get a good night's sleep so many days of the week? And just to give you a bit of perspective, what we find is the girls, more so than boys, report higher levels of anxiety. There might be greater pressures on them, and a number of factors, and perhaps social media use. So we'll have to delve into that a bit further, but again, it gives you a good perspective on that. So then we looked across time from when the MDI started, from 2010, 2011, all the way to 2017, 2018, to see, are we seeing any patterns in sleep, and how many days a week grade 4 students get a good night's sleep. And you see it's remained pretty stable from 2011, where there was a fewer number of children reporting getting a good sleep. But the majority, as I reported before, pretty consistent, are getting a good sleep every night of the week, with a slight downturn recently. So that'd be interesting to see, even over time, to see how much that's changed. And then see for grade 7s, however, over time, you see a significant decrease from 2013, 2014. That's the first year we started collecting MDI data with the grade 7 till current day. So you see a decline from about 29% of students in 2013, 2014, grade 7, reporting having a good sleep every day, to now closer to 25%, going down steadily. So when asking the children grade 4 and grade 7, we see that, in fact, the sorry, it says 4. I know it isn't 44 and 77, so we've duplicated the numbers there. What you'll see is that for grade 4, those grade 4s are good at going to bed. Look at the number going to bed before 9 p.m. And then the ones that are between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. You see something happens around 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. where that's when the grade 7s are going. A sizable proportion are going to bed, and still, what's quite, I guess, shocking for me is the number of children who report going to bed after midnight, and the grade 7s as well. And when you look over time with the grade, what time do you usually go to bed during the weekdays? This is 4 over time, 2010 to 2011 to 2017, 2018. We see these kind of mixed of patterns. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. I'd love some insights from any of you, but this notion of how many kids are going to bed, as you see before 9 p.m. and the number of kids who are going to bed are between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. are the largest groups, with still lower numbers going to bed after that. And in grade 7, you see a bit of a different picture, with again, the majority going to bed between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. and then a smaller group, but still sizable, going to bed between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., but that not shifting too much over time. So what is the connection between sleep and well-being? Do you already know the answer? What does the research tell us? Does sleep matter? Well, you've probably guessed, but if you actually Google the number of books on sleep these days, you'd find probably a bunch. So sleep loss or deprivation, and again, I want to stress it's not just quantity, it's quality, is associated with higher rates of obesity and diabetes, hypertension and cardiovascular disease, anxiety and depression, cognitive function. And actually, what I find is so fascinating, that sleep deprivation or poor sleep quality can actually make a child look like he or she has ADHD-like symptoms. So, you know, it's to me, it's so interesting with our focus on self-regulation, at least in British Columbia, getting kids to pay attention. Maybe the simple prevention is to focus on getting better sleep, do an experiment. Anyways, I have lots of ideas about that. But, so here we are just looking at the relationship between well-being, our well-being index on the MDI, which lower scores mean less well-being and higher scores mean better well-being. And you will see here a very clear linear relationship between having never having a good night's sleep with having those students having the lowest well-being, all the way up to those students who had a good sleep every day report the highest well-being. So this is what we would expect, and it's clear that there is a relationship between well-being and the how often you get a good night's sleep. And I think it's not, I think I'm just trying to, oh, there we go. Okay, in grade 7, we see the same relationship. Those were grade 4 previously, and now grade 7 with those students having never getting a good night's sleep, having the lowest well-being, and those students who have this this one's kind of more equal, 6 times a week and every day having the highest well-being. So again, showing this really positive relationship between getting a good night's sleep and well-being. And here we broke it down into the different dimensions of our social and emotional competence dimension that includes things like optimism, self-esteem, happiness, sadness, as well as self-regulation short-term and self-regulation long-term. So self-regulation short-term is more about being able to regulate yourself for short-term goals, and long one is being able to regulate for in terms of long awaited consequences. And what you see here on every one of these dimensions is a linear relationship. So for optimism, self-esteem, happiness, self-regulation short and self-regulation long, the students who say they never have gotten a good night's sleep or just at very low are the lowest on these dimensions, with higher scores meaning better. And those students, and so for sadness, if you look at, you want it to be that opposite relationship, because never having a good night's sleep means that you have higher sadness and lower sadness if you're getting a good night's sleep. So there you see that relationship. And let's see what's happening in grade 7. We see a very similar pattern, a bit more pronounced even than grade 4, where those grade 7s who are reporting never getting a good night's sleep, lower in optimism, self-esteem, happiness, higher in sadness, and lower in self-regulation short-term and self-regulation long-term. And contrast those students having reporting having a good sleep every day, again have the highest optimism, self-esteem, happiness, lowest sadness, highest self-regulation short-term and self-regulation long-term. So what does this mean? So, well, it's kind of like the question I always remember one of my students asking in one of my classes years ago, where I was reporting the research and all excited about the data, and she said, well, so what? Like, does this really matter? And of course that put me on the spot. I was like, okay, I better have this data. So why does not getting enough sleep really matter for children? Well, we find with some recent research, actually, this is a study by Sarah James and colleagues in 2017 about sleep duration and telomere length. So the telomere shortening in adults is showing results from, this is a part of the DNA. Telomeres are the end of our chromosomes and part of our DNA, and are really important to have your long telomeres. And we know that those adults not getting enough sleep have shorter telomeres, and guess what? The research is showing the same for children, and that the length is about 1.5% shorter for every hour less that children get sleep, the required sleep they get each night. Some of you are thinking about social media. I don't know if any of you have teens in your life or in some way, but social media can play a big role. I know I have 2 sons, and Gray, who is 18 in grade 12, his phone is like an appendage. And they talk about certain kinds of things on social media, even new ones that are coming up all the time. They say kids today are really more like the social media natives. You know, they really were born into a world of social media where we're just the immigrants. We kind of are coming into it. So in this article by Woods and Scott from 2016, hashtag sleepy teens, social media use in adolescence is associated with poor sleep quality, anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. And let's see what they exactly found. They did a study here, let me put it all up there. One study, they examined how social media use related to sleep quality, self-esteem, anxiety, and depression in Scottish adolescents. And they found that adolescents who use social media more, both overall and at nighttime, and those who are more emotionally invested in social media experience poorer sleep quality, lower self-esteem, and higher levels of anxiety and depression. And nighttime specific social media use predicted poorer sleep quality after controlling for anxiety, depression, and self-esteem. So there's something about this nighttime specific social media use. I believe a number of children, even young as grade 4, I'm sure, are going to bed with their cell phones. So when we looked at this relationship, what is the relationship between getting sleep and how much they, how many hours, what time they usually go to bed, and what things they usually do. Do they watch TV, play video or computer games, hang out with friends on a phone or tablet? And again, what you see here is that those children who are going to bed at a later time are also more likely to be going to bed at a later time at night. So those are the ones who are watching more TV, playing video or computer games, and hanging out with friends. And this is grade 4, which is very fascinating indeed. And in grade 7, you find the same relationship with those students who are watching TV, playing video or computer games, and hanging out with friends on a phone, tablet, or computer, who are using those the most, are also the ones who are going to bed at the later time at night. So there is this relationship between use of social media and their bedtime and when they go to sleep. And I think many people talk about how it's hard to switch off after they get down, watching TV, and actually I remember advice years ago hearing about how having a TV in a bedroom is so disruptive. And now, it used to be TVs, now do kids even watch TV anymore? They say they do, but it's very interesting how many watch on the computer. So it's good to think of those things. Okay, how can we help children get the rest they need? So what can we do next? So we're going to just talk about a couple of things, and let's talk about school start time. And many of you probably heard about the debate about when schools start. Getting ready for bed, the idea of teaching kids and adults about sleep hygiene, having regular routines, waking up at a certain time, going to bed at the same time, and of course, even starting different ways to start the school day. Are there different ways to start schools? Instead of starting with the math class the first thing in the morning, especially for those grade 7s who might be very sleepy because their brain is keeping them up at night, are there different ways to engage them? So across Canada, the average start time is about 8:43 a.m., and it ranges between 7:56 to 9:30. And 9:30 start time means 19 more minutes of sleep, and 7% greater chance of getting sufficient sleep, and a 7% less chance of feeling tired. So this additional 3.2 minutes of sleep for every 10 minutes, again, really important. The other thing is there's a mismatch actually in thinking about circadian rhythms, and this is another study that came out that 69% of students in this study were meeting the minimum sleep duration. Remember from this other study reported earlier, but 60% still reported feeling tired, and that we know that the onset of puberty delays sleep onset by about 2 hours. So again, thinking, is this mismatch between when we start the school day, when we're requiring kids to go to bed, and often we might not see, we might realize, maybe they're not, the onset of puberty, we're thinking of children and like, but they're not entering they're not entering puberty yet in grade 4. Yes, many times you can't see all of it, but their brains are starting to develop. So we need to think about that.
Kim, we were just wondering if we have a quick poll. Curious to know of the audience out there what time school starts in your communities. So I think we asked specifically about grade 7. So Henry's just going to deploy that poll now here. Curious to see how that matches up with what these other studies found across Canada.
Okay, is the clock ticking like for
Clock
us?
is ticking.
Okay, what are the results?
We got 40% voting, 50% voting. We're closing in.
Yay.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Okay, we got 61% voting.
Okay.
2, 1. Okay, that was over 30 seconds. So we're closing the poll, and very interesting. So we have 18% at 8 to 8:30 and 73% at 8:30 to 9. So, and then there's a few people that don't know. That probably means you don't have either children or
the kids are not going to school. Right, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, I'll just say both of my boys who are, one's in university, the other one's in high school, but in grade 7, their school started at 9 o'clock.
Wow.
Their elementary school.
It's interesting because Michael said that his school started at
7:20.
7:20.
That was in high school, though. That was high school.
Yeah,
It was
it's so
brutal.
interesting.
It was brutal.
It is. It's so, and I was reading a lot. I mean, we could talk a whole thing about just a whole webinar just about when schools should start, because I was reading a lot of the research and studies actually being done. We're randomly, we're choosing and experiments of changing the start time and looking at things like grades and absenteeism and all sorts of other things. So it's really, just so you know, better sleep, better achievement. It's like the bottom line. So we also know that there's the sleep hygiene. So looking at things, this is from Participation, like a consistent sleep-wake time for kids, even on weekends. Having a bedtime routine, it'd be so interesting. You get so busy and you think about kids coming back after being in activities, after dinner and rushing in and often there's a rush before bed perhaps, but this idea of just having a typical bedtime routine. We know physical activity during the day is really good to help you have a better sleep, and limiting screen time. I don't need to say that too much, but that really again is a time to disconnect and to have the time to do that. So there's a sleep hygiene screen time study that looked at 67 studies across the world. And just so you know, 90% of studies show adverse association between screen time and sleep. I guess you probably didn't need to know that. Well, there you have the evidence. And I should mention too, we'll be giving you all the references and other resources you'll get that will be posted. Michael, will they be posted along with the webinar?
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. And there's especially a stronger correlation with computers, phones, and video games versus television, where kids are really more engaged. I guess television would be considered more passive in some ways. This was part of a group of students. I was looking, Michael put this together, and the idea of it was looking at students who put together a Prezi presentation on what to do at night to help you sleep, and they identified a number of factors to help their classmates think about what they can do to get some good sleep and trying to go to bed. Many of the things we were talking about, that this is students' engagement in that as well, really important. Yeah, I think it's really important. I have some ideas that we'll talk about in a minute. This one I really liked. It was at Vancouver Technical Secondary School. So a few years ago, Vancouver Tech in Vancouver, people might know who know Vancouver on Broadway, kind of a lower socioeconomic area. They did a survey, actually the MDI and another survey where they asked students about their sleep. And then the administrators and the teachers shared the data with the students and said, here's what we learned. And one of the clearer findings that emerged that really piqued students' interest was how many of them were not getting a good night's sleep. So the administrators came to the students and said, well, what should we do? And so the students got together to identify a number of ways to help sleep. And so they called it the Year of Sleep. And I will say they did advocate for a nap time during the day of the high school. I don't believe that was bought in, although I could say it would be great to have a quiet time and kids could go to sleep or practice mindfulness or something like that. So they did something every month. They had a pediatrician come in and do an assembly about talking about why sleep is important and kind of the research on sleep. They had a month where they sent home a wicker basket with each student with a note in it with instructions for the parents and the students that at 6 o'clock in the evening, everyone please put your phone into this basket and do not retrieve it until the next morning. They had a sleep challenge where they challenged everyone to try and go to bed before 10 or at 10 for a week and monitor what happened and what their week was, how their focus was. It'd be a wonderful experiment. And the one that you see here is the wake-a-thon at the school. So instead of a sleepover at the Van Tech, they had a wake-over, I guess it would be called, or a wake-a-thon, where a number of students from Vancouver Tech and their teachers and administrators stayed at the school, and the students stayed awake all night. And then CBC News came in, a crew, at 5 a.m. and did a number of cognitive tests to see how do you respond when you're sleep deprived. And the students learned so much. You can imagine how engaging it was. And I want to talk about this. What's so important is you use your MDI data to go back and share the information with students and engage students in thinking about the solutions instead of just coming up with your own. I can't emphasize that enough of how you get the students involved. Here's another one that's really cool at Renfrew Elementary School. You know, a different way to start the morning. If we know that kids are coming in sleepy in the morning and might not be ready to delve into that math, why not teach them about their brain and physical activities and then have them do some activities? So here is one at Renfrew Elementary School in Vancouver. What they do is they do morning Tai Chi on the lawn, including all the staff and teachers as well. Go and do this, and kids, I know a couple of other schools where the kids learn about how to develop their executive functions and do dance or do some other type of activity in the morning to get their brain going as well. So what are some things that, I'm going to look to you probably have, the audience probably have countless ways that you could think of. But we really, with the MDI and the data that you have as you're getting your school reports.
This end of this week, I think it's safe to say Friday,
and your whole school reports, those who are getting their MDI data, to now use this as a way to instigate conversations about sleep. Look at those data, bring it to the students, bring it to the parents, bring it to the community to find out how do we compare, how much sleep are children getting, what are the reasons, to understand what other local factors. I remember a very interesting study, actually it was in Coquitlam. There was a group of administrators I was presenting data to a few years ago, and they looked at their maps and saw that, in fact, certain areas, in fact, affluent areas in Coquitlam, students were reporting the least amount of sleep. And it was curious, but then I was curious. They were not. They figured it out. They said, well, what happens is many of the parents in this neighborhood work in Vancouver and have a long commute. So they drop their children off at the before school care, make the long commute to Vancouver, come home, pick up their children, and then the children have activities and they want to keep their kids up to, you don't want to come home and have your child go right to sleep. You want to help them with homework. And so they were talking about how they thought that maybe one of the reasons is because many of those students were engaged in a number of activities as well. Students who are overscheduled, we hear about that. I don't know, there's a whole debate, and if you have questions, I can help answer those. But, are students overscheduled and have a hard time after being in activity after activity slowing down? Understand the idea about sleep and present the data to other groups as well, I think, is some of the things. I was just going to mention one other thing, and this is something we haven't really talked about, but as some of you might know, or maybe not, as a researcher, I also study a number of school programs, and one of them that I have been investigating for a number of years is called Mind Up, and it's a program that embeds mindfulness and social emotional learning for children in elementary and middle school. One of the most surprising findings that we emerged our very first year of the study, when we went to ask the kids what they said, told us what this program helped them learn, is they talked about helping learn how to go to sleep. So their mindful breathing and this idea of learning to focus their breath, listening to a chime sometimes, they said that the program really helped them to get a better sleep. And often kids, who have a lot going on, who have anxiety, don't have specific strategies to help them go to sleep. And anyways, it's another way to explore. There's probably many more.
And Kim, we have a participant on the webinar who shared what her son's school does in the morning to help wake them up. And that's that they often start the day with a jog or a walk around the school.
Yes.
So just like the Tai Chi starting in the morning, her son's school does a jog or a walk.
That's wonderful. And I think, what is so fascinating is you start by teaching children about their brain and the idea of, what's changing in their brain, and then help them. Like, these activities can certainly help. I know I wanted to bring in also work by Adele Diamond. Some of you might know of Adele's work from here at UBC, who studies executive functions and self-regulation, which again, if I talk about the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that is responsible for decision making and for cognitive control, that Adele really has found in research that that activities such as music, dance, or activities and mindfulness are practices that help develop that prefrontal cortex and that self-regulation. So this idea of how you can change the brain, and certainly sleep, getting a good night's sleep is one way that you can do it for sure. So I don't know if we want to talk about, there's that announcement, MDI school data released this Friday. There's a help talk March 1st on mobile digital. I should mention there's just here at HELP, we have monthly help talks, and we should send that out or put it someplace, send it out maybe to people on the webinar, that here at HELP, I think it's at HELP, on mobile digital technologies and adolescent mental health. We also have a April webinar on deeper conversations and inquiry tools as well. And then if you have stories like that some of us shared, please send them to Michael so we can add them to our treasure trove of resources on Discover MDI, our field guide. So I'm hoping that there would be some questions and suggestions and things.
So Kim had mentioned the help talks on March 1st. So for those of you who are interested in getting more information, I've just posted a link there in the chat so you can check it out and learn more about what time it is, where it's happening, and how you can join if you'd like. And then
I'm not certain yet, but we are asking about whether it will be recorded. I'll let you know and update everyone as soon as we find that out.
And yes, of course, if you have any questions, please do let us know. Again, there's a chat box as well as the question box. Just connect with us here and we would be happy to answer them. But it looks like so far we haven't got any questions from the audience.
I just want to remind everyone that we'll be sharing all of the links that we mentioned, the publications, any sort of magazine articles, some videos of kids doing Tai Chi, a video about the Van Tex experience. Those will all be shared by the end of the week on Discover MDI. And we'll be sending out an email as well to all the webinar registrants so that you guys have that handy.
I'm just looking about the DNA sleep connection. There's a great question here. And I have to say I'm not an expert on DNA as well. We do have at HELP a molecular geneticist who studies DNA, but we do know, I'll just mention DNA. One of the things that we have been studying is looking at epigenetic change. So we used to think that DNA was very stable and didn't change, and we now know that the environment can influence how much your DNA is actually turned up or turned down. So I think that there's just emerging evidence looking at DNA in children, but so does, just to so emphasize again that these aspects of the environment, such as even sleep deprivation or staying awake, can get under the skin and even influence your body. I was just going to mention one thing. I came up with this idea. I'd love to see this happen, I guess. I'm just putting it out there for you, all of you. Is, you could actually take a month of sleep for a whole school, and you could embed the sleep data from the MDI and the ways to move forward into so many subject areas. If you think about it, you could have it in math. You could have kids keep track of their sleep every night and try, and sort of graph it. You could have students do language arts where they read about sleep. You could even have some of them do science experiments and see some of the things that happens when you get a good night's sleep versus not such a good night's sleep. So there's so many ways that you can integrate it, and it really, this approach of inquiry really aligns with the BC's new curriculum that is about really getting the student-centered and engaging across disciplines to do really exciting stuff. And I think students would be very fascinated, and I think they also would help teach us some, and probably go home and talk to their parents about how important sleep is as well. So it could be a whole different kind of intervention, getting the children to lead us. Any more questions over here?
Yeah, so we have another question about whether there's a difference in sleep in young children that have older siblings, much older siblings.
Oh, that's a great question. I have no idea, but that would be something to really explore. I mean, what's your thoughts? Maybe I just ask, what's the thoughts about it? I think, maybe thinking that having, I just automatically think I don't have any wide age range, but of course, if there's a sibling who's staying up late, it'd be hard to get the little one to go to bed when the older sibling is doing fun things. So it probably presents a challenge, I would say. That's a good question, though. I don't know, did you come across any older siblings? Yeah, there's a wide open sleep landscape of which to explore in the research.
But if you have questions that we didn't address in today's webinar, if you are taking a shower tomorrow and something pops into your head, I really do encourage you to contact us. You can either email me, this email address right on the screen here, or even submit a question through the Discover MDI field guide. There's contact buttons at the bottom of the page. Even if we can't devote a whole webinar to it, we can definitely do some digging and share some of what we find on our social media and on field guide. So please let us know. What you are curious about is very important to us.
Yes.
All right, so I really want to thank you guys for joining us all today.
Oh, happy Valentine's Day. I will say that you're probably, I was going to make a link between pro-social behavior and empathy and sleep. So just so you know that when you're really sleep deprived, you're not so kind to others. So so hopefully you'll get, you'll have a good night's sleep and thinking about sleep more now as you go forward in your day and the rest of the week.
All right, thanks. We will see you guys in April. Look on our social media and the HELP website for the next webinar we'll be advertising. And like I promised, we'll be sending all of you an email with a link to the post where we're putting all of the resources we talked about today. Thanks.
Thank you.